There's nothing we can do to bring them back. We still have control over how we treat people.
That was Sarah Grace Patrick, the daughter of 41-year-old Kristen Brock and 45-year-old James Brock, who were both tragically killed in the early hours of February 20th, 2025, crying and paying her tribute to her mother and stepfather during their funeral. Who would have thought that amidst this show of emotion, she was the one behind the gun? She went on to mourn the passing of her mother and stepfather on social media platforms, posting regularly on how much she has missed her mother and how life has been hard for her since their passing. For over 4 months, the murder of Kristen Brock and James Brock has gone unsolved, with no one thinking about the possibility of the suspect to be the 17-year-old who lived in the same house with them. However, the police made a breakthrough in the case, and the results shocked everyone.
Today, we can confirm that an arrest has been made in the case. Kristen Brock's 17-year-old daughter, Sarah Grace Patrick, has been taken into custody and charged with 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of aggravated assault.
The big question remains, why did she do it? Why kill your own mother and stepfather? Why call the police after killing your mother and go on to act like nothing happened?
We are still working with her diligently. Our investigators have been speaking with her.
It is correct that she was the one who made the 911 call, correct?
Yes.
At what point did investigators begin to focus on her as the suspect?
So I believe in the beginning of any case, everyone's a suspect. I think I told many of you that when we were on scene that day. However, as an investigation continues and everything ebbs and flows, like I said in my press release, mountains of evidence has gotten us through here today. Lots of processing, lots of working with our law enforcement partners to get us to where we are today that honed in on her as a suspect.
What is the fate of the 6-year-old girl who discovered the murder of her parents? Where does she go from here? Stick around as we unravel through the mystery surrounding the murder of Kristen Brock and James Brock by the 17-year-old Sarah Grace Patrick. If you love true crime stories like this, please click the subscribe button and be the first to receive a notification, because we don't just tell stories. We bring to you true crime documentaries the world wants us to forget. We are the time and tides of history. We make sure no story worth reliving is left untold. Subscribe now. It was a quiet February morning on Tyus Carrollton Road, a stretch of two-lane pavement, winding through farmland and old southern woods. Out here, life moves slowly. People know their neighbors. Church is a weekly ritual. Trouble, real trouble, rarely knocks on doors. But on the morning of February 20th, 2025, something happened that Carroll County had never seen before. And as the sun rose that day, it didn't just reveal a typical Georgia dawn. It revealed something darker. Inside a modest home at 790 Tyus Road, 2 people, a mother and stepfather, lay dead in their bed, shot. No signs of forced entry. No signs of theft. No sign of a break-in. Just death. Quiet, chilling, and deliberate. And the person who made the 911 call? Their daughter, 17-year-old Sarah Grace Patrick. Authorities say the first distress call came not from the victims themselves, but from Sarah, who reported that her 6-year-old sister had discovered their parents' lifeless bodies. The child had tried to wake them, only to find them both unresponsive. But how does a 6-year-old process something like that? And how does a teenager, their sibling, respond to such a scene? The world didn't know it yet, but this wouldn't just be a tragic case of domestic violence or random crime. This was something far more complex, far more disturbing, and possibly premeditated. Inside the bedroom, investigators found the bodies of 41-year-old Kristen Brock and 45-year-old James Brock. They had both been shot while lying in bed, a point repeatedly confirmed in public statements. They were well-known members of the Catalyst Church in Carrollton. Kristen was described as kind and full of energy. James was known for his sense of humor. Church members recalled how they would arrive to Sunday service together, always sitting in the same pew. Now they are both gone, murdered in their own home, and no one, not even their closest friends, had seen it coming. No signs of forced entry. Sheriff's deputies noticed something strange almost immediately. There were no broken windows, no kicked-in doors. One door was slightly ajar, but that was it. There were no signs of struggle, and most importantly, nothing appeared stolen. So if this wasn't a robbery, what was it? Why would someone enter a house in the dead of night, go straight to the master bedroom, shoot 2 people, and leave everything else untouched? Could it have been a hit? A personal vendetta? Or was the killer already inside the home? To the outside world, the Brock family looked like any blended American household. Kristen and James had married years earlier. They were raising their two daughters, Sarah Grace, now 17, and her much younger sister, in a quiet, semi-rural life. But in the months that followed the murders, detectives began to notice something odd. Sarah Grace had taken an unusually public role in mourning. She spoke at her mother's funeral service. She posted emotional tributes on social media. She grieved loudly, visibly, lovingly. So then why, investigators asked, did the evidence keep leading back to her? The case didn't go cold. In fact, it never even cooled down. According to the Carroll County Sheriff's Office, they had been working around the clock since day one. The FBI and GBI, Georgia Bureau of Investigation, were brought in almost immediately. A multi-agency task force combed through physical and digital evidence, conducted countless interviews, and pieced together a picture that, while not yet public, was clear enough for prosecutors. Sheriff spokesperson Ashley Halsey said, "We wanted to be absolutely sure. This is someone's daughter, someone's sister, and we knew what charging a 17-year-old would mean." Still, as the weeks turned into months, they weren't ready to charge anyone, at least not yet. Then in early July, something shifted. Sarah Grace Patrick was notified that there was a warrant for her arrest. And instead of running or hiding, she walked into the Carroll County Jail, accompanied by her father, and turned herself in. There were no police chases, no dramatic arrests, just a teenage girl walking into a sheriff's office, accused of murdering both her mother and stepfather. Let that sink in. A girl who had spoken at her mother's memorial, who had shared heartfelt words on social media, who had cried in front of family and friends, now stood accused of pulling the trigger. What happened in the 5 months between the murders and the arrest? What changed? Sarah was charged with 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of aggravated assault. She would be tried as an adult. Her bond at the time of arrest was reportedly denied or remained pending. Despite her age, just 17, the court and investigators treated her case with the full weight of adult criminal law. Sheriff Halsey made clear in the department statement, "We spent 5 months doing everything we could to get it right, and we are confident in the evidence that led to this arrest." But the public, and perhaps even some law enforcement, still had unanswered questions. Perhaps the most disturbing part of this entire story isn't the murder itself. It's the why. To date, no public motive has been released. No detailed confession has been shared. No specific reason, no abuse allegations, no financial motive, no dispute has been cited by police. So what drove this young woman to allegedly commit such an act? Was there something in the family dynamic that no one saw? Was it mental health? A buildup of tension? Or something else entirely? The sheriff's department says they are still open to other suspects, even as Sarah faces the primary charges. Could there have been accomplices? In all this chaos, one person has been called the saddest victim of all. The 6-year-old girl who found her parents dead. She didn't just lose her mother and stepfather. She lost her big sister too. No one knows how much she saw or how much she understands. But this case, now being investigated at the highest level, has robbed her of her childhood, her parents, and the home she knew. At Catalyst Church, where the Brocks were known and loved, grief turned into silence. Friends and churchgoers reportedly had no comment when news of Sarah's arrest broke. The local community, once vocal in their support of the family, grew quiet. The story had become something too complex, too painful, too unbelievable. One moment, a family united in faith. The next, shattered by betrayal. Sarah Grace Patrick is now in custody. The legal process is underway, but the questions don't stop. Why would a teenager allegedly kill the people who raised her? How does someone mourn in public while hiding such a secret? What clues were missed in the days before the shooting? And most of all, is there more to the story that has yet to surface? In Carroll County, Georgia, 2 people are dead. A family is destroyed. A child is traumatized. And the suspect is someone no one saw coming. But behind the grief, behind the funerals, behind the prayers, lies a truth still being uncovered. Was this a moment of rage, a long-simmering grudge, or a calculated act of something far more sinister? The answers, if they come, will shape How this small Georgia town remembers the name. Sarah Grace Patrick. By the time the sun had fully risen on February 20th, 2025, the home on Tyus Carrollton Road was already crawling with law enforcement. The quiet gravel driveway that once welcomed church friends and school drop-offs was now lined with police cruisers and an ambulance. Inside, 2 bodies lay still in the master bedroom. Kristen Brock and her husband James Brock, both fatally shot. It looked clean. No broken windows. No scattered belongings. No signs of struggle. So where was the chaos? Where was the mess that usually follows murder? That's what investigators immediately noticed. The silence of the scene. And sometimes, silence screams the loudest. Investigators with the Carroll County Sheriff's Office described the initial walkthrough as unsettling. There was no indication of a break-in, no blood trail, no signs of robbery. One officer told a local reporter. It looked like someone had just gone to sleep and didn't wake up. The door was unlocked, or possibly just left slightly open. But everything else seemed undisturbed. There were no stolen electronics, no signs of a getaway, and no evidence of outside intrusion. That left authorities with a disturbing possibility. Was the killer already inside the home? And if so, within 48 hours, this was no longer a standard rural homicide investigation. It was clear. This case required bigger eyes and sharper tools. The FBI and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, GBI, joined the task force. Forensic techs from both agencies were brought in to process not just the home, but the digital landscape surrounding it. Phones, emails, social media activity, smart devices, and any digital footprint that could help reconstruct the crime. Why this level of involvement? Because nothing made sense. And when things don't make sense, you don't guess, you dig. What a suspect says can be rehearsed. What a suspect posts online can be curated. But what a suspect clicks and searches, that tells a different story. Sources familiar with the investigation reported that law enforcement obtained digital warrants on multiple devices belonging to family members, including cell phones, laptops and tablets, cloud storage accounts, social media accounts, call logs, and text messages. We don't yet know what they found. Officials have been deliberately tight-lipped about the content of this evidence. But what we do know is that it led them to one conclusion. Sarah Grace Patrick was not just a grieving daughter. She was a suspect. Over the course of 5 months, investigators conducted dozens of interviews with extended family members, church friends, classmates, school counselors, neighbors, Sarah Grace herself. Every interaction was combed for inconsistencies, contradictions, or missing details. Why did Sarah Grace speak at the funeral with such composure? Why did her grief seem so outward, so visible? Yet not quite, right? What was the dynamic between her and her mother in the days leading up to the shooting? One source told People magazine that the family dynamic had noticeable tension. Another confirmed Sarah had been living between households, not always present in the Brock home. So, was there conflict brewing behind closed doors? And if so, why hadn't anyone noticed? According to law enforcement, the home had some security infrastructure. It's unclear whether it included smart cameras or basic alarm systems, but investigators did retrieve footage and data from nearby sources. Neighbors' ring doorbells, traffic cams, and any adjacent street-level surveillance were analyzed to detect any foot traffic, vehicles approaching the house, unusual nighttime movement. But again, nothing indicated an outside intrusion. No strange cars, no unknown visitors, just one teenage daughter and her younger sister in the house with 2 murdered parents. In an investigation of this nature, one of the first things detectives construct is a minute-by-minute timeline. They ask, when were the victims last seen alive? When were they last heard from? What were they doing in the hours leading up to the murder? Who was with them? What time did Sarah go to bed? What time did she call 911? What time did the shooting occur? The autopsy would later narrow the approximate time of death, critical for identifying who had the opportunity. And all signs, investigators say, pointed to someone who had unrestricted access. Though sheriff's officials declined to release full details, they confirmed that the digital and physical evidence was overwhelming. So what does that likely mean? Well, we don't have the exact list. In similar cases involving teens and digital forensics, authorities typically focus on Search history. Had Sarah looked up how to conceal a crime? Gun mechanics? Text messages. Were there messages indicating planning, threats, or admissions? Location data. Did her phone place her near the scene at the time of death? Deleted data. Was anything suspicious erased or wiped shortly after the murders? And most haunting of all, did she confess to someone in private? Why wait 5 months? It's one of the most pressing questions the public asked after Sarah Grace's arrest in July. If they knew it was her, why wait 5 months? The answer, according to the Carroll County Sheriff's Office, lies in the depth of the evidence. They didn't want to move prematurely. They didn't want to arrest based on suspicion alone. They wanted a prosecutable case, an airtight one. This is someone's child, someone's sister. We don't take this lightly, said Sheriff Terry Langley in a July press conference. We only moved when we were absolutely confident. On July 8, 2025, Sarah Grace Patrick voluntarily walked into the Carroll County Jail with her father. She had been notified in advance of her arrest warrant. There was no standoff, no escape attempt, no denial, at least publicly. Was this a sign of remorse or a calculated effort to maintain control of the narrative? That's a question only Sarah and possibly the courts can answer. A community in shock. When word broke that Sarah Grace was arrested for the murders of her mother and stepfather, the town went silent. No Facebook condolences. No interviews with family friends. Not even church leadership offered comments. Perhaps they were stunned, or perhaps they had seen something and said nothing. Did anyone suspect her before the arrest? Was there a sense of unease beneath her grief? And if so, why didn't anyone speak up? Still more to come? As of the latest update, sheriff's officials have not ruled out the possibility of additional arrests. They say the case is still open, that other persons of interest may exist, that evidence is still being reviewed, which begs the question, was Sarah acting alone? Or was someone else involved? A friend, a partner, a manipulator? We may not know for weeks, or months, or ever. But what we do know is this. The evidence points to intentional, targeted violence. The victims were shot while sleeping. The alleged perpetrator was a trusted daughter. Sometimes it's not the strangers who break in that destroy families. Sometimes the person you welcome at your table, the one who says grace with you before dinner, the one who shares your name, is the one who ends it all. But what led Sarah Grace Patrick from a grief-stricken teen to accuse a double murderer? What evidence convinced investigators that the one who dialed 911 was the one who pulled the trigger? And most of all, what are we still not being told? Every tragedy starts somewhere, but some tragedies don't begin with a bang. They begin with silence. A missed sign, a relationship slowly unraveling behind locked doors. And on Tyus Carrollton Road in rural Georgia, the Brock household seemed, at least from the outside, ordinary. A Christian family, churchgoers, blended but bonded. 2 parents, 2 daughters. Until one morning in February 2025, when that illusion was shattered with 2 gunshots to the head, and slowly, piece by piece, a new question emerged. Was this really a happy home? The family unit. Let's go back. Kristen Brock, 41, was a mother of 2. Sarah Grace Patrick was her eldest daughter, born from a previous relationship. Her youngest, just 6 years old, was shared with her husband James Brock, 45. James had stepped into a stepfather role years earlier. A contractor by trade, he was described by locals as goofy, hardworking, and easy to get along with. Kristen was known for her faith. A regular presence at Catalyst Church, she was said to be warm, enthusiastic, and as one friend described, a hugger. On Sundays, they were a picture of Southern family life. They smiled, they served, they prayed. But behind those Sunday smiles, what was really happening at home? Sarah Grace Patrick, the eldest daughter. Sarah Grace was just 17 when the murders occurred. By all public accounts, she had lived a somewhat fluid home life. Not always under her mother's roof. Not always in one place. Multiple media sources confirm that she had spent time living with relatives. She was said to have moved between homes, occasionally staying with extended family. Was that by choice or necessity? One family acquaintance told Law and Crime that Sarah was largely on her own. That comment, though brief, raised larger questions. Had she become estranged from her mother? Was there underlying tension with James? Or were these just the natural growing pains of teenage life? Fractures behind the family portrait? Let's pause on what's public and verified. Sarah was not always living full-time with Kristen and James. She was described as independent, possibly emotionally distant. There were no prior public allegations of abuse in the home by either parent. There were also no police calls, CPS cases, or domestic violence records associated with the Brocks. So what, then, could have caused a rupture this deep? The contrast: public love, private distance? At Kristen Brock's funeral, Sarah Grace delivered a speech. Multiple attendees recall her words as emotional, raw, and filled with grief. On social media, Sarah posted touching tributes, honoring her mother's legacy and mourning the tragedy. To some, it was heartbreaking. To others, it raised questions. She was so composed, too composed. One anonymous attendee told reporters, "It was like she was trying to convince us of something. Did she mean it? Or was it a performance? Had she really lost a parent? Or was she hiding a secret the entire time?" What do we know about their relationship? There are no public diaries, no text messages released, no surveillance of their private lives. But law enforcement has made one thing clear. This was not a random act of violence. So we look at the dynamics we do know. Sarah was a teenager nearing adulthood. With that comes friction, rules, boundaries, pushback. Were there arguments? Conflicts over freedom? Curfews? Money? Investigators haven't confirmed specifics, but they haven't denied the possibility of personal motive either. So again we ask, what happened inside that house? And when did the love begin to curdle? Stepfather relationships often fraught. Step-parenting is complex. Even in loving homes, boundaries can be blurry. Loyalty can feel divided. Love can feel conditional. Was James Brock a disciplinarian? Or did Sarah see him as an outsider? Again, we don't have his words. But the fact remains, he was murdered in the same bed, in the same act as Sarah's mother. This wasn't targeted at just one parent. It was both. That tells investigators something chilling. Whoever did this wasn't just angry. They were wiping out a home. The younger sister, silent witness, lost innocence. In all of this, one child remains at the center of heartbreak. Sarah's 6-year-old sister, who found their bodies, who called out to them, who tried to wake them. She lost both parents. And then weeks later, she lost her older sister, too. Sheriff Terry Langley called her the most innocent victim in this case. A child now surrounded by grief, trauma, and headlines, likely unaware of the full truth. Who will raise her? What will she grow up believing? And what role, if any, did Sarah once play in her life? Protector? Rival? Stranger? A life outside the house? Sarah Grace was said to be smart, articulate, socially active. Some described her as spiritual, others as private. She was active online and known to her peers. Her digital footprint was examined thoroughly by authorities. But the findings have not been released. Was she struggling with mental health? Did she confide in anyone about her home life? Or was she simply masking turmoil no one could see? Pressure points. Was there a catalyst? No clear motive has been released by law enforcement. But one must ask, was there a specific event that pushed things too far? A recent fight? A threat of discipline? A change in family structure? A boyfriend disapproved of? A personal goal blocked? In countless familial homicide cases, the motive isn't always years in the making. Sometimes it's one decision, one threat, one insult that breaks the surface tension. Could something like that have happened here? And if so, will we ever know? The double target. This wasn't an act of passion. Both Kristen and James were killed in the same manner, same bed, same night. That's not spontaneous rage. That's intentional destruction. So we ask, was this premeditated? Was it symbolic? Aimed at the family structure itself? Was it retaliation? Rebellion? And was anyone else involved? As of now, Sarah Grace Patrick is the only person charged. But investigators continue to review digital evidence and interview third parties. Which brings us to a darker possibility. Did someone encourage her? Manipulate her? Plan this with her? The family left behind, silence and grief. The extended family, including Sarah's biological father, has remained almost entirely silent. No public statements, no family interviews, only a calm walk into the jail on July 8th as her father escorted her in. Was this a final gesture of support or quiet resignation to a reality none of them could stop? We don't know, and maybe we never will. In the end, this wasn't a crime in the middle of the night. It was a collapse of a home, of trust, of family. No one screamed. No one ran. No one called for help until it was already too late. And in that silence, something unthinkable happened. Did Sarah Grace Patrick pull the trigger on her own childhood? Did she sever the very ties that made her a daughter, a sister, a part of something? Or was she simply the last domino in a chain reaction that no one else ever saw? She wept at the funeral. She wrote tributes on social media. She called 911. She comforted her little sister. And for 5 long months, no one knew what was hiding behind Sarah Grace Patrick's grief. But when the charges dropped on July 8th, 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of aggravated assault, the world asked one question. Why? Why would a 17-year-old girl, with no prior record, no reported abuse, no history of violence, turn on the 2 people who raised her? And why now? This is the chapter with no easy answers. Because this is the chapter where the story becomes the most disturbing. No motive released intentionally. Let's begin with what we know. To date, no official motive has been released by law enforcement. The Carroll County Sheriff's Office, the FBI, and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation have all refused to comment on why they believe Sarah committed the crime. Why the silence? According to Sheriff Terry Langley, we are still investigating every angle of this case. We have not ruled out the possibility of others being involved. Our priority is protecting the integrity of the evidence and due process. Translation? They're not ready to tell us everything, but that silence, chilling as it is, makes the public's need to understand even louder. Theories versus fact. What's the line? It's easy to speculate, but this isn't the space for guesswork. This case is real. 2 people are dead. A child is accused. Another child is traumatized. So we limit ourselves to verifiable facts and examine them with sharp, honest questions. Let's review what we know that could suggest motive. Sarah Grace was living between homes, not always under her mother's roof. There were no reports of abuse, no history of police calls, and no prior criminal activity. The crime scene showed no forced entry, no robbery, and both victims were shot in their sleep. Investigators collected mountains of physical and digital evidence. Law enforcement believes the act was intentional and targeted. These are the puzzle pieces. But what image do they form? Premeditation, was this planned? To shoot 2 people in their bed, separately, deliberately, suggests planning, not chaos. Don't panic. So the first question becomes, did Sarah plan this murder? Authorities haven't disclosed the murder weapon's origin, but sources confirm the shots were fatal and delivered while both Kristen and James were sleeping. A method consistent with execution, not spontaneous rage. If she obtained the weapon in advance, if she waited until the house was quiet, if she aimed carefully and fled silently, then the act wasn't impulsive. It was calculated. But what would drive a 17-year-old to commit a calculated act of matricide and patricide? That's the void investigators are still navigating. The role of digital evidence. Digital forensics was central to Sarah's arrest. Law enforcement publicly stated that they had collected massive amounts of data, including search histories, text messages, social media activity, call logs, cloud files, and location metadata. What could they have found? Did she research how to commit a murder? Did she search for gun laws or alibis? Were there messages to anyone about revenge or fear? Was there a digital trail of conflict with her parents? We don't know the contents, but the fact that investigators relied on this data and that it took 5 months to build a case tells us something. Whatever was found wasn't obvious. It had to be built, cross-referenced, and verified. And yet, it was compelling enough to charge her with murder. Control? Anger? Escape? In other cases involving teens who kill family members, motives often fall into categories. Control. The child feels manipulated or restricted. Anger. Conflict builds to violence. Escape. The teen wants out at any cost. External influence. A third party encourages the act. Is it possible Sarah felt trapped? Friends and peers have not publicly commented, but reports suggest she may have felt isolated, independent, even removed from the household. Was she battling mental health issues? Was she secretly angry about her living arrangements? Was she trying to start over? To erase the past and rebuild something new? We can't say for sure, but it's the direction many are quietly exploring. Did relationships play a role? There's been no confirmation of romantic partners, peer influence, or external pressure. But law enforcement has not ruled out the involvement of others. Could a friend have persuaded her? Could a romantic interest have manipulated her? Could she have been acting under duress? This angle remains open until the evidence is presented in court. These questions remain in the realm of verified possibility, not fiction, but yet to be confirmed fact. The farewell that fooled everyone? One of the most haunting parts of this case is the funeral performance. Sarah Grace stood before a grieving crowd and gave a eulogy. She posted online. She cried. She played the role of a devastated daughter. If she was guilty all along, then that performance wasn't just convincing. It was calculated. Why would she do that? Was it guilt? Was it image management? Was it fear of being caught? Or was it something colder? Could it be that the act of mourning wasn't real at all? Could it be that she had already emotionally severed herself from her family? Before pulling the trigger? No signs, no warnings. Perhaps the most disturbing detail is the lack of warning signs. This wasn't a home with police visits. This wasn't a child flagged for behavioral issues. This wasn't a school shooting suspect with a manifesto or online threats. By all accounts, Sarah Grace Patrick was just a girl who smiled in photos, who had friends, who prayed in church. But behind that image, something had changed. Something snapped. And now 2 people are dead. Sheriff Terry Langley has stated that some elements of the case may only emerge during trial. That includes motive. So it's possible, even likely, that the public won't know the why until court proceedings begin. That could take months. But when the prosecution lays out its case, it will need to show intent, premeditation, and perhaps most importantly, reason. Even if the motive is irrational, vague, or emotional, the jury will want to understand what pushed Sarah over the edge. Until then, we are left only with possibilities. And possibilities in a case like this are never comforting. For the victims, motive changes nothing. Kristen and James are still gone. Their youngest child is still parentless. Sarah is still behind bars. But for the rest of us, for justice, motive matters. We need to understand why. Because if a seemingly ordinary teenager can carry out an act this devastating, what signs should we have seen? What should we be looking for in our own homes, our own schools, our own communities? In a world obsessed with cause and effect, we cling to motive like it's a lifeline. But sometimes the cause hides in the shadows. Sometimes the effect is all we see. And in this case, the motive remains locked away, somewhere in Sarah's heart, her mind, or her browser history. What made her pick up that gun? What made her walk into that room? What made her end the only family she had? Until those answers emerge, we are left with the most terrifying possibility of all, that sometimes the monsters are born in silence. 5 months of silence, 2 deaths, 1 arrest, and now the case of Sarah Grace Patrick, the 17-year-old girl accused of killing her mother and stepfather. His heading where all stories of law and loss eventually go, the courtroom. But this won't be a simple legal proceeding. This is more than a case file. This is more than a docket number. This is the unraveling of a family and a community caught in the wreckage. So what happens next? What does justice look like when the accused is still a child? The arrest, quiet but final. On July 8, 2025, Sarah Grace Patrick walked into the Carroll County Jail, accompanied by her biological father. There are no handcuffs at school, no perp walk through the parking lot, just a quiet surrender in the morning hours. By then, law enforcement had 5 months of evidence, described as a combination of digital forensics, physical data, and in-depth interviews. The charges were swift and severe. 2 counts of malice murder, 2 counts of aggravated assault, and she would be tried as an adult, a high-profile case, a minor suspect, a double homicide. All of it now sits in the hands of the judicial system. In the eyes of the law, she's an adult now. In Georgia, 17-year-olds accused of violent felonies can be charged as adults. That means Sarah Grace is facing adult penalties, including the possibility of life in prison. There's no parole in Georgia for malice murder unless the defendant was under 18 at the time of the crime. Even then, parole eligibility comes after 30 years. So let's ask the hard question. If convicted, will Sarah Grace Patrick spend the rest of her life behind bars? The process begins. What to expect in court. Here's how the legal path is unfolding. Booking and initial hearing. After her arrest, Sarah was formally booked. Her bond status remains unclear, but initial court appearances suggest she is being held pretrial. Probable cause hearings. This is where the prosecution lays out just enough evidence to justify the arrest, not to prove guilt, but to prove there's reason to move forward. Grand jury or indictment. Prosecutors will present the case to a grand jury, if not already done, to secure a formal indictment. This is often a procedural step, but crucial to due process. Pre-trial motions. Defense attorneys may seek to suppress certain evidence, challenge digital forensics, or question admissibility of statements. Trial. If the case goes to trial, which it likely will, the proceedings will be open to public observation. And for the first time, details about motive and evidence may become public. At this point, Sarah's legal team has not made any public statements. But based on precedent, there are a few directions they could go. Mental health, defense. They may argue diminished capacity or psychological distress, lack of intent. They may claim the shootings were accidental, or argue that evidence does not support premeditation. Alternate suspect theory. Could another person have committed the crime? This would require raising doubt, not necessarily proving another party's guilt. But without public filings, this is purely legal structure, not speculation. The actual defense, when it comes, will define how this case is remembered. In small towns, news travels fast. But in Carroll County, this story didn't just travel. It reverberated. The community that once grieved with Sarah now doesn't know how to feel. Neighbors stopped talking. Churches remained tight-lipped. Family members retreated from public life. We lost a mother. We lost a father. And now we've lost a daughter too, said one church elder, off record. This wasn't a crime committed by a stranger. It was a collapse from within. The younger sister, who speaks for her, left behind in all of this, is the most innocent soul in the entire story. The 6-year-old girl who woke up, walked into her parents' room, and found their lifeless bodies. She reportedly tried to wake them. And then moments later, her older sister, Sarah, called 911. Now she has lost both parents, and if the charges hold, her sister too. There has been no public update on her custody status, mental health, or living arrangement. But one thing is certain. This child will live the rest of her life shaped by a moment she could never understand. The prosecution will seek accountability. The defense may seek mercy. But in cases like this, where the line between child and criminal victim and villain becomes blurred, the justice system faces a deeper question. What is justice for a teenager who murders her family? Is it life in prison? Is it rehabilitation? Is it understanding what made her snap? And more disturbingly, can there ever really be closure? What happens if she's found guilty? If a jury finds Sarah Grace Patrick guilty of both murders, she could face 2 life sentences with or without the possibility of parole. If parole is granted, it would only be considered after 30 years. Additional charges like aggravated assault or firearm possession could add decades more to her sentence. But here's the twist. She was 17 when it happened, which means Georgia law allows the possibility, not the promise, of parole. But for all practical purposes, it could still be a life behind bars. And if she's found innocent, if she's acquitted, she walks. But that's only the legal version of freedom. The world may never see her the same way again. Her family may never trust her. Her community may never forget. In either outcome, guilty or not, there's no happy ending. Tyus, Georgia, is a town where front doors are still left open and kids ride bikes without fear. Or at least they were. This case didn't just change one family. It changed the atmosphere of the entire county. Neighbors now question what they don't see. Pastors now preach with heavier hearts. Parents now watch their children a little closer. Because if this could happen here, what makes any of us truly safe? As of now, Sarah Grace Patrick remains in custody, awaiting trial. No date has been set. No evidence has been made public. And still, the biggest questions hang in the air like smoke from a house that hasn't stopped burning. Why did she do it? Was she alone? Can justice truly heal anything that's broken? In time, the courtroom will speak. The jury will listen. The truth, or something close to it, will rise to the surface. But until then, we wait, not just for a verdict, but for a reason, for meaning. Because behind every headline, every arrest photo, every courtroom bench, there's a simple, agonizing question echoing across Carroll County. How did we get here? And will we ever